Welcome to another program of All About Vets. Now, I always give a teaser, and this is, if my memory serves me correctly, this is the first program about this topic. I'll give you, it starts with an S and ends with E. See you in a minute. Welcome back, and if you haven't guessed it, I know some of you smart there, some of you probably got it already, it's about suicide prevention. And to my right here is a lovely young lady who's going to be talking to you and give you a lot of good information. I learned a lot from her PowerPoint presentation. And so if you would just look into that camera right there, that's your camera, let everybody know who you are, what you've been doing, how they can contact you if they drive to you, and your phone number.
Thank you, Councilman Barnes. My name is Karen McNeely Boswell, and I'm a social worker in the Suicide Prevention Program at Central Alabama Veterans Healthcare System, commonly referred to as the VA. And I've been working in suicide prevention with the VA since 2008. I started off at the VA in 2001 with their post-traumatic stress disorders team.
That's a mouthful, Karen, that's a mouthful. But this is extremely important. Going through your PowerPoint presentation, you really educated me as far as statistics. And I know that knowing the signs and being aware of the signs is important, but the stats, the statistics are awesome. So we're going to go to the third slide that says Veterans and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Karen, the statistics really blew my mind. But let's start out with who a veteran is.
A veteran would be any person who served honorably on active duty in the armed forces of the United States of America.
Yep, and it says, to our viewing audience, what is the Department of Veterans Affairs?
The Department of Veterans Affairs is made up of 3 arms. One of the arms is the Veterans Health Administration, which is the medical arm of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Another branch is the Veterans Benefits Administration, and that's the one that handles any service-connected claims or any other type of monetary awards that veterans might receive. The third arm of the Department of Veterans Affairs is the National Cemetery Administration, which handles burials for our veterans.
Right. And in fact, that's going to be very important for me and my wife, because guess what? That's going to be our next move, is out to Fort Mitchell. So next slide, please. Okay, in our next slide, we have objectives of this here. The objectives is have a general understanding of the scope of suicide within the United States. That's very important. And know how to identify a veteran that may be at risk for suicide. And then finally, this is most important, know what to do when you identify a veteran at risk. Next slide. I'll have you talk about the statistics.
For the last year upon which we have statistics, which is 2016, there were over 45,000 deaths in the United States from suicide. That
awesome.
Makes suicide the 10th leading cause of death in our country. As many of you all are aware, on the news we hear about murders that occur in our communities. Well, homicide is only the 17th leading cause of death in our country, which means in our country more people take their lives than are actually murdered every year.
And what is staggering, every 12.3 minutes someone dies by suicide.
That is correct.
That, Karen, got my attention quick. Every 12.3 minutes, someone dies by suicide. That's an awesome statistic.
Yes.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
And we've learned that about 1 million people make a suicide attempt every year. And that is so alarming when you think about the people that are suffering emotionally, and that they feel that that is the only option for
that they have. And you know, Karen, that's why it's very important when I went through the slide to pay attention to the cues. And I'm glad that you're on this program, because it's something that everyone should really know. And so it says here, gender disparities. Let's talk about that.
Well, women make 3 times more suicide attempts a year than men, but men die by suicide at 4 times the rate of women.
Explain, why is that?
Well, because men use what we consider more lethal means.
I got you.
Men in general are more inclined to use a firearm when they make a suicide attempt. And when you use a firearm, therefore you're going to be more successful
Right.
when you make an attempt, as opposed to an opportunity that you might take to cut yourself or to take an overdose of pills. Those things you can survive, or decide at the last minute you've made a mistake and call for help.
Right,
But when
right.
you've taken a weapon and used it to shoot yourself, there's no coming
there's
back
no
from
coming
that
back
the
from that.
majority of the time.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Let us speak about the next slide here.
The next slide gives some actual statistics about the percentage of veterans who die by suicide out of that 45,000. Our statistics show that approximately 18% of that 45,000 number is composed of veterans.
So 18% of the overall stats in the states, 18% are veterans.
18% are veterans. And we also know that veterans are more likely than anyone in the general population to use a firearm to try to take their lives.
And that kind of stands to reason. And on average,
On average, 764 suicide attempts are made among veterans that are receiving VA healthcare services. But when we go and look at the statistics of how many die a day, it's about 20 veterans that die every day. And why we're doing these outreaches is because 12 of those veterans were not even enrolled in VA healthcare.
Ooh.
So we want to get the message out there that the VA has
Does have help.
care that's
Right.
available for veterans to help them, so that they'll be able to know that they have other options.
now this is staggering here, the last one, it says 25% of veteran suicides have a history of previous suicide attempt. 1/4, that's alarming.
That is, and that's why we try to get help out there, because conversely, there's 75% of people that are out there that may make an attempt, and we're able to get help for them
That's what I'm
so
s-
that they don't go in that 1/4% of people who do eventually
Right.
take their lives.
And that was another thing that was alarming. 25% of veteran suicides have a history of previous attempts. So that's why it's very important, as our viewing audience is going to find out, to know for the cues, look for signs. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the myths. This is what I really want you to elaborate on, because the myths are interesting. So let's talk about this first one.
These are all things that people generally tend to believe, which may or may not be true.
I see.
So the first one says, if someone wants to die by suicide, they will find a way to do it.
Okay.
And we say that is false, because if you're talking to someone and you ask them what was their plan to harm themselves, and if they tell you a firearm and you get them to put that firearm aside or give it to someone else or lock it up where it will be safe, then they do not go on later to harm themselves.
I see.
So if you take the means away from them that they were going to use, they're not going to find a second means to try to kill themselves.
Boy, that's huge.
But again, you have to put treatment in as well.
Yes, that is huge. Let's go to the next one. What's to say? Common myths versus realities?
Common myths versus realities. So that's just saying that when you take someone's method away from them, it makes it much less convenient for them to find another method.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Death by suicide is preventable.
Yes, it is. It is preventable.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what we want people to know. We want people to know that when you ask someone if they're thinking about suicide, that opens the question up for them.
Next
So
slide, please.
that opens the question up for them so they can say yes and receive the services that they need. So
Okay.
never be afraid to ask someone directly if they are thinking about harming themselves or taking their lives.
And I've heard that mentioned before, that people are reluctant for some reason to ask someone if they are contemplating suicide.
And we want to go ahead and be direct Because when you're direct, that gives someone an opportunity to share with you how they are in fact feeling.
In other
And
words-
only when you know can you put the help in that's needed.
In other words, don't hedge.
Don't hedge.
Don't hedge around it. Just ask them directly. Next slide, please.
It says asking about suicide may lead someone to taking his or her life. That is completely false.
I'm
What it
glad.
does is that it opens up the communication and allows someone to share with you if they are actually struggling.
But you know, Karen, a lot of people actually think contrary to that. They're afraid that if they say it, it might trigger a person to think that way.
Well, that would be the same, Councilman, as if you told me that your arm was hurting and I ask you, do you think you're having a heart attack? Is that going to cause you to have the heart attack?
You're one of something. That's a good analogy. She's sharp. So that's a good analogy for our viewing audience to know. But I have heard that from some people. I'm just afraid to ask it. But you're saying be direct and confront it.
Yes.
Because that will open up a channel of communication between you and that person.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
awesome.
That's exactly what we want, that communication.
Next slide, something about they are takers, talkers, and there are doers.
We believe that if anyone is talking about suicide, that you should take that seriously.
Yes.
From a child to a teenager, a college student, to someone in their mid-years, to someone in their later years. If they're talking about suicide, you take that seriously.
Right, and that's when you would be direct and just ask them, are you thinking about taking your life? Okay. Next slide. Typical myths versus realities. Did we touch that already? No.
That one says if somebody really wants to die by suicide, there's nothing that you can do about it. And we believe that that's not true. We believe that if someone really wants to die by suicide, usually that's because they're in some kind of pain or some kind of difficulty. And if you can help that person find a solution to their problem, that's what they want, a solution to their problem. And so we can't magically fix people's marriages or magically give someone employment or magically get rid of someone's pain. But there are treatments, there are alternatives. There's always something that can help that person get out of that crisis mode.
Right.
And once you're out of that crisis mode, then we can be able to put interventions in place. And that's what we want to be able to do.
And that's awesome, because a lot of times it is helping the individual. I can see we're asking them directly, not being afraid to approach the subject, because that's what the problem is with a lot of people. They're afraid to approach it. Would precipitate an open dialogue so that the person would open up to you, because then the person would know that you're interested in what pain they're going through.
And that you
or
care.
you recognize, and bingo, bingo, that you care. That you care. That's awesome. Next slide, please.
That one is just saying that most people are in a crisis state that will pass, and if you can put that intervention in, that's what they're wanting, that's what they desire.
Right. And next slide, please. And which is pretty much what we, the next one after that, please, which pretty much what we talked about, that most suicidal ideas are associated with treatable disorders. And the real beauty about something like that, and when I went through the slides here, you clarified a lot just by explaining things to me. I can see where the best thing that you can do when you are confronted with someone like that is to engage them in conversation. And even more importantly, to let them know that you really care about them as a person. Because the reality is that all of us want to be liked. And when someone extends a hand to you, you are more open to open up and speak with, even if it's a total stranger. And that's the beauty about communication.
It is, it is.
And the beauty about what your presentation here is letting every last one of us know. You don't have to have 1,000 degrees on your wall, because that's another thing people are afraid of. Am I skilled enough? Am I trained enough to be able to help? You don't have to. You just have to let a person know that you care.
You have to let a person know that you care, and then help assist them to get the care that they need.
That's it. And I think we're going to be going through this in your slides.
We
Next
certainly
slide,
are.
please. Or is that the one you want?
Well, I wanted to say one more thing.
Sure.
It's important for people to know that there's no one face for what suicide looks like.
Right.
That if someone tells you that they're going to plan a vacation, that doesn't mean that they're not suicidal. If someone has children, that doesn't mean that they won't become suicidal. If someone knows how much you love them, that doesn't mean that they won't be suicidal. And so it's important to know that anyone with a number of stressors, a number of different life events can become depressed or can become manic and become suicidal. So there is no one face, and that's why it's important that we're going to go over some of these warning signs so that when you see them, you can know what to do.
You know, because I have heard and have read that some people said, we never knew because he was laughing. He's the kind that jokes all the time. And so it's really important, what you just got finished verbalizing, extremely important, that there's no one face. A person could be the life of the party, and have suicidal ideations. That's a very, very, very good. What we're going to do, we're going to take a break, Karen, and we're going to be back and get a whole bunch of this really good information that she's educated me big time. See you next on the other end of the commercial.
The United Negro College Fund presents the Mayor's Mask Ball featuring Nate Evans and the Temptations Review. Saturday, March 23rd, 7 p.m. at the beautiful Grand Ballroom at the Columbus Convention and Trade Center. Don't miss the formal affair of the year. The Mayor's Mask Ball featuring Nate Evans and the Temptations Review. 7 p.m. at the Columbus Convention and Trade Center. All proceeds to benefit the UNCF. For ticket information, call 404-302-8623.
Welcome back to, you know what we're going to do? Before I even say anything, while it's on my mind, there's a number that you want people. Would you look into that and start out, let them know who you are, what your job is, where you're located, and that a very, very, very caring and important number, and let them know what that number is.
My name is Karen McNeely Boswell, and I'm a social worker with the Suicide Prevention Team at Central Alabama Veterans Healthcare System, which includes the 2 VA sites here in Columbus and a site in Tuskegee, Alabama. And we also have other locations at Fort Benning, in Monroeville, in Fort Rucker, and in Dothan, Alabama. So that's where our VA sites are located. I want you all to know a very important number. It's the National Military and Veterans Crisis Line number. And when veterans call it, they push number 1, and they will get a trained counselor on the other line to talk with them about whatever their concerns are. But that military and veterans telephone number is 1-800-273-8255. And anyone can call that number and receive a trained counselor on the other line, and they will be referred, if they're a veteran, to the VA of their choice, and if they're not a veteran, they'll be referred to the United Way agency that'll be able to help them deal with their concern.
Karen, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm going to be honest with you. Going through your slide, I learned a lot. And you know, in life, you know, they said you can always learn. I thought I knew a lot about suicide, but through her PowerPoint presentation, I just learned so much. So we're going to learn an acronym.
Yes.
SAVE.
SAVE, SAVE.
And what does that stand for?
The S stands for being able to know the signs of suicidal thinking and behaviors. The A stands for being able to ask the appropriate questions. The V stands for being able to validate someone's experience. And the E stands for being able to encourage and to help expedite someone getting treatment.
So that what they have to do is just remember, and we're going to repeat that again because it's important, SAVE. That's very important. Next slide, please.
We know that some people don't show any outward signs that they may be struggling, so it's important for you to know your loved one and to know their behaviors and to get them talking about their behaviors. And so it's very important that you know some of these signs that we're getting ready to discuss.
Okay. Next slide, please.
One of the things I do when I talk to veterans that have survived a suicide attempt is I go back and ask them what was going on right before they made the attempt. And they're honest, and they say they were having difficulty in their sleeping patterns. Either they were sleeping all the time or they couldn't sleep at all. There were changes in their eating habits. Either they weren't eating at all or they were overeating. They were having feelings of hopelessness, no purpose, feeling like things were never going to get any better, they were never going to work out. And another very important clue that someone may be having difficulty is that they're withdrawing from their usual activities. They're withdrawing emotionally from their family and friends. And so also other signs are when people become angry at the drop of a hat, and more angry than the situation might warrant.
Might warrant, yes.
And they're always anxious or irritable, always angry. Those are things to let you know, hey, something's going on. Let's talk about what's
Yes.
going on with you.
And you know, I'm so glad that you took the time to go through all of those things so that our viewing audience would know that. And you know, while you were going through that, I was in my mind just thinking about it's a whole litany of things that a person could be feeling. And hopelessness is definitely one of them. And so it's good for us to have this here because it's a very serious thing that you have got to really know the person. That's the first thing you said. Know the person, because if you know someone, you can detect any deviation from their normal way of acting.
Another thing that we have found is that when people are under distress, sometimes they increase their alcohol consumption. And so that might be another clue to you.
Another clue.
Another clue, if they're increasing their alcohol consumption or increasing their drug consumption, if they're taking more medications than they're supposed to get the desired effect, or if they start taking illegal substances, that might be a clue to you as well that they're in emotional distress.
And that's good for you to say that, because a lot of times if someone sees or perceives that, it might trigger for them to react to that person in not an encouraging way. And so it's good, because that could just be a cue that this person's trying to cope, trying to adapt, but definitely has suicidal ideations.
Or they may not have gotten to that point yet, and you don't want them to get to that point. So you want to be able to ask, I noticed that you're consuming a 12 case of beer, and that's not usual for you. What's going on that you're feeling like that you need to do that?
Right. That is really, this is opening up. I know I'm going to be getting a lot of calls after this program, because this is an area that we have never discussed, and I am learning so much here in front of this camera from you.
Also, if they're engaged in risky behaviors, like someone that had never gotten a DUI before, someone who'd never gotten a speeding ticket before, it's important to ask, what's going on that these things are happening with you?
Next slide, please. Let's talk about this one.
The one way that you would know that someone was feeling suicidal would be what they would verbalize to you. So it's important when you ask someone how they're doing to really take the time to listen to what they have to say. So often we say, how you doing? And someone says fine or okay, or even before they answer, we've gone on in our own conversations.
Exactly.
And so it's important to really listen to people. It's important.
And I'm looking
to
at
really
the slide that says here, the presence of any of the following signs requires immediate attention: thinking about hurting or killing themselves, looking for ways to die, talking about death, dying, or suicide, self-destructive or risk-taking behaviors, like you just got finished saying, especially when it involves alcohol, drugs, or weapons. Very good. Next slide, please. Now, this is getting to the meat, more of the meat. Veteran-specific risks.
Veteran-specific risks. One of the things that we found that puts veterans at risk is the type of deployment that they had.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we know that the highest rate for suicide is among Caucasian males over the age of 70. And most of those would have been veterans that served in the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And that may still be struggling because they never were able to get treatment for their post-traumatic stress disorders.
And we have come a long way, Karen, with that, because I can remember when the military never reached out to a lot of the veterans. It just was not on their radar that traumatic instances could linger until they started doing the PET scanning and noticed the changes in the brains, and that's what really caught my attention when I went to nursing school, because I mean it was a shock to me that PTSD can cause irreparable changes
In your brain.
in your brain morphologically, and so that is when they did the PET scanning, which was about maybe 10 years ago. Then they really started realizing and putting more emphasis, and they recognized that traumatic experience can have devastating effects on individuals.
Yes, it can.
You know,
Yes, it
so
can.
I'm so glad that now, can we go through some of these things here?
Of course, of course. One other thing that we need to look at is how many deployments someone had. In our current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have men and women who've had multiple deployments, who've been in a war zone
Right.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times.
And that is something
repeated
that-
exposure
yes,
to
repeated-
trauma.
And that is something which never occurred previously. You went over and did your year or whatever. After 6 months, you took leave. You went back again, and you. But these frequent deployments are devastating to a lot of these women and men who are deployed.
Exposure to extreme stress. If you were in active combat, you lost someone in combat, you were wounded yourself in combat, or you suffered a traumatic brain injury from a mortar attack or an IED explosion. So having that type of injury also would put you at higher risk
Yes.
if you're not able to get treatment.
Here's some physical sexual assault while in the service, not limited to women.
Not limited to
That-
women.
That when I came through, I'm so glad, because a lot of times people exclude the men in something like that.
Unfortunately, just like we have physical and sexual assault in our society, we have physical and sexual assault
Yes.
in the military
Yes.
because it's made up of people in our society.
That's exactly right.
And so those things, now the VA ask about that. As soon as a veteran enters our doors, we do screenings and we ask about physical and sexual assault so that we can find out if someone had to deal with that unfortunate incident, that we have treatment that is available for those things as well.
And I was so I was so glad to see that when I went through the PowerPoint. And you know, Karen, we have come through people like yourself who have done research. We have come a long, long way in addressing PTSD and in addressing the signs and symptoms of suicide. We've come a long way. And it's encouraging. When I went through this PowerPoint the first time, I just learned so much. But when I went through the second time, it made me feel really good that we have progressed so much in reaching out and helping the veterans.
Well, that's what the VA realizes that their mission is, and it's one of our top priorities as a VA is to eliminate suicide.
Yes. Next slide. Oh, here's the biggie. Asking the question.
Asking the question. And it's important how you ask the question. You wait until someone has given you enough information that they're struggling for you to ask it, and you would not ever say, "You're not thinking about hurting yourself, are you?" Because they're going to obviously answer no. So
Yes.
you want to ask it in an open-ended fashion that gives them the opportunity to give you their answer.
That's a gem. Could we cover all that? Can you cover that again? First of all, the one thing that was interesting is that what you were saying, you engage in conversation, but you listen. You don't automatically ask the question, right? You listen so that you can get the cues, and then you ask the open-ended question.
You ask the open-ended question, that's correct. So it's all right to say, are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you have a plan to take your own life? Because if someone has a plan versus if they have the thought, that puts them in a different category.
Yes, it does.
If someone has the thought, of course you want to get them care. But if it's gotten to the point where they have a plan in place, then you really need to intervene to be of some assistance and get them to the correct, either get law enforcement there to help or go with them to the hospital.
Right. And that's why it's important to ask, because you never know what stage that person is in. And that's why, and I'm so glad we approached that, and we keep saying, ask the question. And the way that you You don't say you're not thinking about it, because first thing they're going to say is no. That was a good learning point right there.
And
Excellent.
so the next thing is to be able to validate someone's experience. And by that I mean, if you have a broken foot, you know that that hurts. So you would never say to someone, oh, that doesn't really hurt that bad,
Right.
because a broken foot hurts. So if someone's going through emotional pain or mental anguish, that hurts as well.
Right,
And so
and-
it's important to be able to ask someone, what are they struggling with, and how are they coping with what they're struggling with?
Because if you do that, you're really legitimizing their feelings. And what's one. And secondly, letting them know that you care.
Exactly, exactly.
Two good points there.
Exactly. And you never want to downplay anyone's experience. I had a gentleman whose girlfriend had flushed his engagement ring down the toilet. And he said that emotional pain felt worse to him than seeing his sergeant shot in combat. And so it would have never been appropriate for me to say to him, oh, that girl wasn't for you anyway. Well, obviously she wasn't, but that wouldn't have been appropriate.
That's
Instead,
exactly
it
right.
was important for me to validate his
That's
experience
exactly
and
right.
say, that must have felt really terrible.
That's right.
Tell me more
And
about it.
and there you go. It encourages the person to really engage in conversation with you, and know this person, right? Even if this person is the first encounter, when you say, "Well, tell me more," it lets that person know you are really concerned about that and you really care about them, and that's awesome. Because all of us, there's not a person that I've ever met that doesn't want someone to care about them. And that is a huge incentive to have someone open up.
Yes,
That's
yes
all.
it is, yes it is. So
Okay.
we encourage you to validate their experience, and then once someone has expressed to you that they are struggling, it's important to encourage them to get treatment and to help them seek the treatment that they need.
Right. Let me think now. Let's see, what slide are we on? You're validating the veteran's experience now.
So you want to recognize that the situation is serious to them, and you don't want to show that you're passing judgment.
That's huge. That's huge. Because a lot of times a person may inadvertently say something that is judgmental.
And we want to stay away from making judgments. We want to reassure the person that whatever their situation's seriousness is to them, that we understand that it's hurtful for them.
Right.
And that we want to be able to help them get whatever assistance can be provided for them.
The biggest thing is that we cannot engage in conversation with someone like that. We have preconceived ideas. We're going to take a break right now, and we're going to come back with all this good information about suicide prevention from Karen. Learning a whole bunch of stuff.
The United Negro College Fund presents the Mayor's Mask Ball featuring Nate Evans and the Temptations Review. Saturday, March 23rd, 7 p.m. at the beautiful Grand Ballroom at the Columbus Convention and Trade Center. Don't miss the formal affair of the year. The Mayor's Mask Ball featuring Nate Evans and the Temptations Review. 7 p.m. at the Columbus Convention and Trade Center. All proceeds to benefit the UNCF. For ticket information, call 404-302-8623.
Welcome back to All About Vets. And Karen, again, we're going to have you look into that screen and let them know about you and about that helpline.
Yes, my name is Karen McNeely Boswell, and I'm part of the suicide prevention team for Central Alabama Veterans Healthcare System, commonly known as the VA. And I want you to know a very important number. That's the number to the National Military and Veterans Crisis Line. That number is 1-800-273-8255. And the number says it's the Veterans Crisis Line. Veterans would press 1 and they would be put in touch with a trained counselor. But it's also available to any citizens in our country. And if you're not a veteran, you'll be hooked up with the United Way agency that will help meet your concern.
All righty, that's awesome. So now, Karen, let's go through, because in the interest of time, let's go quickly through some of the encouraged treatment and expediting getting help, because I really want to get to the part where it says resources, because that's the meat on the bone. You're giving such good information about all this here, but I want for our viewing audience to know about where can they go for resources. So let's go through this here, encourage treatment and expediting these 3 slides rather quickly, and then we'll get
Okay.
to the resources.
Okay. It's very important that if someone has done anything to harm themselves, that you do not keep that a secret. We can't keep hurtful behaviors a secret. We have to make sure that people know that you're able to tell someone in your family that you trust or someone else that you trust so that you can have that support that you need. And it's very important to get someone to the nearest hospital or clinic if they need treatment, and a hospital and clinic for them to be able to get the counseling resources that are available for them.
Right. Okay, let's go to the next slide, encourage.
Okay. It's also important if someone is really suicidal that you don't leave them alone. You wouldn't say to them, well, there's a clinic on 10th and 13th, just drive yourself over there.
Right.
No, you would go with
them,
them
sure.
to the VA clinic or go with them to their closest emergency department to get help. And so it's also important if you need to dial 911 to dial 911 to get that person the assistance that they need. Don't be afraid to take those steps.
Okay. Next slide, please.
It's also very important to realize that there's some safety things you need to keep in mind. If someone has a weapon, don't try to argue them out of the weapon. Don't try to take the weapon from them. Instead, you need to let them know that you're going to call for assistance, that you
Okay.
will be calling for assistance, and that you can't keep it a secret. That if someone has taken pills or cut or harmed themselves in any way, that you need to call 911 to get them assistance.
Okay. Now we're going to resources.
It's very important that the people in this area know where they can go to for help. Our clinics here have walk-in access, which means anyone can show up in a crisis and be seen by a mental health care professional.
Okay.
So we have the clinic on 10th and 13th, and we have the clinic at Fort Benning that are available.
Sure.
As well as we encourage our veterans to go to their nearest hospital if they need to, and let the staff there know that they are a veteran so that they can receive the appropriate services.
And you said you got vet centers, so you covered that already with vet centers here.
Well, no, we also have a vet center here,
There we
and
go.
vet centers are just for veterans that served in combat situations. Those clinics, and we have one here in Columbus, it's in Cross Country Plaza
That's exactly
behind the
right.
Publix.
And I've had them on the show here.
And so that vet center has weekend and evening hours because we know we have people that are students and working. That vet center also has marriage and family counseling that is available to veterans and their families as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Next, resources.
We also want people to know that there are websites that they can go on to learn more information. One is www.mentalhealth.va.gov, and that will give them a wealth of information on different mental health diagnoses and how to encourage someone to go and get care. Another resource is called maketheconnection.net, which actually has veterans telling their stories about how they came to realize that they were struggling and were able to get help for whatever diagnosis they had, and were able to live lives that are meaningful, full, and productive.
And that's powerful because it allows the person who may be thinking to know that they're not alone, and then to know that it's achievable, that they can deal with their situation.
Also, for families or veterans that think that their loved one may have post-traumatic stress disorder, there's another website that they can go to, www.ptsd.va.gov, and that will also give them information about treatments that are available for post-traumatic stress disorder.
That is awesome. Well, Karen, let me just tell you something. This is not going to be the last time we're going to cover the showdown.
Thank you.
I learned a long time ago, repetition is the mother of study. So I would like to have you plan to come back again on the show. This is a very, very, very important topic. You have been a wealth with a capital W of information, and I sincerely appreciate that. And we'll say thank you on behalf of not only myself, but our viewing audience as well.
If I could say one last
Sure.
thing, We have a slogan, and it takes the courage and strength of a warrior to ask for help. And we want our veterans to know that they can ask for help and that the VA is here and ready and available to be of service to them. They've earned it.
Would you repeat that again and look into that camera right there?
We believe that veterans, we have a slogan that talks about what we believe about our veterans, that it takes the courage and strength of a warrior to ask for help. And the VA is available. You've served our country, and we want to serve you by being able to give you the assistance that you need.
Well, Karen, I just want to thank you loads for coming on. I've learned a lot. I know our viewing audience has learned a lot. This is a blessing, a huge blessing here in our community for our veterans. And if you're going to come back on my show, please make time to come back. And as always, you know what I like to do? I'd like to thank the government of Columbus, Georgia, Consolidated Government, the Mayor, B.H. Skip Henderson, the producer, Mr. Mike King, the city manager, Mr. Isaiah Hughley, for allowing this program to be able to give very insightful information to our community. And so until next time, you know what I want to leave you with? Please be good to yourself, because God loves you. Bye-bye.